Today we're going to start with something called a story called The Plight of the St. Louis, which is just to keep some things in perspective with regards to refugees. So at this point in Europe, there are some people that are in denial, but there are other people that are seeing this escalation of violent behavior and deciding that they want to get out. And some of those people are part of this story. Leanne Reef Lear, pictured here in 1938. In the original picture, she's alongside of her mother and her brother. She was born in Vienna, Austria in 1934. And these are her words. I should have been a normal little girl, happy with my special dolls and my big brothers who thought me as noisy nuisance but loved me anyway, and my doting parents. But the world around me was going mad, and the life I should have had was not to be. Leanne's father was a dentist, but the Nazis would not let him or other Jews do that particular work. So one day he was found dead at the bottom of a stairwell. Some had suggested he committed suicide. Some thought he had been murdered. Leanne was never quite sure. She was not yet 5 when she and her mother and her brother and 934 other Jewish passengers set sail for Cuba from the port of Hamburg, Germany, on a luxury liner called the St. Louis. The passengers all had Cuban entry permits, and most had quota numbers that would have let them into the United States eventually. But while they were at sea, Cuba changed its immigration policy, and most of the passengers were not allowed off the ship. After days of frantic negotiations, the St. Louis was forced to leave Cuba. But the captain didn't want to take the Jewish passengers back to Germany. He thought he knew what was going to happen to them there, so he headed for Miami. Telegrams were sent to President Roosevelt asking him to grant asylum to these refugees. They did have quota numbers, after all. The telegrams were not answered. The United States Coast Guard boat stayed close to the St. Louis to make sure no passengers jumped overboard and tried to swim ashore. Finally, the captain, running out of supplies, could do little else. He headed back to Europe, and here are Leanne's words again. My mother and brother and I were among the passengers who survived, about a fourth of those on the ship. We were sent back to Europe and given haven in France, only to find the Nazis at our doorstep again a few months later. Somehow we managed to get to the United States in 1941. I was 7, a wide-eyed, bewildered girl, greeted by New York children playing street games to wartime hate ditties. I remember a particularly popular one. Whistle while you work, Hitler is a jerk, Mussolini is a meanie, and the Japs are worse. I'm sorry for the phrasing. I tried to explain that some Germans were good and some bad. On more than one occasion, my non-groupie response earned me the wrath of the parents, who did not hesitate to suggest I go back to where I came from. It hurts even now, when I remember the tone with which the words were delivered. Dr. Leanne Reif Lear moved to Massachusetts and became a research scientist, a mother, and an American. So it just goes to show that some people, when we start talking about the Holocaust, say, well, why didn't they just run away? I mean, I would have run away. But the problem was becoming like, where to? There were few places that were willing to take Jews in. First of all, there's widespread anti-Semitism throughout Europe, so some countries are anti-Semitic and not wanting the Jewish population there. And others are already concerned about taking care of the population they have on hand. Other places have now been occupied by the Nazis, and fleeing wasn't going to do any good. So just running away was a more difficult prospect than you might think. Although the average Jew had very little chance of reaching the United States, people of exceptional merit, including physicist Albert Einstein, author Thomas Mann, architect Walter Gropius, and Paul Tillich, who was a famous theologian, were among about the 100,000 refugees that the United States accepted in. Most Americans wanted to keep the doors closed. Among Americans, there was widespread anti-Semitism and fear that enemy agents would be allowed to enter the country President Roosevelt said that while he sympathized with the Jews, he just couldn't do anything which would conceivably hurt the future of the present American citizenry.
September the 12th, 1938. The entire civilized world, as a CBS broadcast put it, was anxiously waiting to hear Hitler's next threat. It came in an unprecedented live broadcast from the Nazi Party Congress in Nuremberg. Hitler demanded that the Sudetenland, a region of Czechoslovakia inhabited mostly by German-speaking people, become a part of Germany.
The Columbia Broadcasting System has brought its listeners the address by Adolf Hitler. At this time, we present H.B. Cossenborn. Good afternoon, everybody. Adolf Hitler has spoken, and the world has listened. The world has listened because it feared that this speech might mean war.
The British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, who'd never been on an aeroplane before, flew to Germany twice within 10 days to seek a peaceful settlement.
Just to see on the newsreel screen Chamberlain coming there with his umbrella is unthinkable to a German mind. Hitler with an umbrella, you know, you laugh and you think about that. We thought they were weak.
Chamberlain failed. Hitler refused to withdraw his demands. The Sudetenland would be his, one way or the other. War now seemed inevitable. In Britain, nervous citizens began to build bomb shelters. In France, army reserves were called up. And then, only 24 hours before Hitler's promised invasion of Czechoslovakia, Prime Minister Chamberlain once again flew to Germany. At a meeting in Munich with Hitler and Italy's Benito Mussolini, Chamberlain abandoned the Sudetenland to Germany in return for what he called peace in our time. Hitler gave his word that there would be no more territorial claims. Chamberlain flew home to a hero's welcome from a Britain anxious to avoid another conflict after the devastating slaughter of World War I only 20 years earlier.
Here is the paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine. As symbolic of the desire of our two peoples never to go to war with one another again.
Chamberlain got what he thought was peace. Hitler got the Sudetenland.
To us Germans, it was a great thing. Their land is bordering on Germany, and as the Sudeten people were Germans, so we thought, yes, well, why should they live in Czechoslovakia?
On October the 1st, 1938, Hitler welcomed 3.5 million Czechoslovakians of German blood into the Reich. Hitler's reception was a replay of Austria. As Hitler was being cheered in the Sudetenland, the Nazis' campaign against German Jews was intensifying, very much aided by an incident in Paris. On November the 7th, a young Jew, Herschel Grinspan, distraught over the deportation of his parents, walked into the German embassy in Paris and shot a minor official, Ernst von Rath.
Whilst he was fighting death, the newspapers carried headlines, banner headlines against the Jewish people. The Jews have taken off their mask from their face. They have shown now what they want to do to us. It was dreadful. We said, if only this man does not die. But of course he died.
Von Rath's death became Hitler's opportunity. only a junior diplomat, von Rath was nonetheless accorded the honors of a fallen hero. The ceremony was intended to inspire revenge. For once, said Joseph Goebbels, the Jews should get the feel of popular anger. That anger exploded on the night of November the 10th, 1938. Kristallnacht.
I saw the synagogue in flames. People came from all over. Fire department came. They did not make one effort to put out the flames. Kids were laughing. Kids were having fun. I heard, "Kill the Jews, kill the Jews."
For 24 hours, Nazi stormtroopers rampaged through Germany and Austria, destroying synagogues and shops. The night of broken glass, in German, Kristallnacht. Scores of people were killed, more than 20,000 arrested. It was now clear there was no future for Jews in Germany.
For the first time in America, it broke through a certain part of the awareness that something horrible was happening in Hitler's Germany. Roosevelt himself said he just was incomprehensible to imagine that such a thing could happen in the 20th century.
By 1939, there were about 250,000 Jews that remained in Germany. Scare tactics had caused many to flee, but other nations that Hitler occupied had millions more, and obsessed with the desire to rid Europe of its Jews, Hitler imposed what he called the final solution. It was a policy of genocide. It was decided at the Wannassee conference that it wasn't good enough to leave the Jewish population elsewhere in Europe, that they must be exterminated from the earth as to not contaminate the master race that Hitler was attempting to create. So a policy of genocide, the deliberate and systematic killing of an entire population, was instituted. The condemned. Hitler's final solution rested on the belief that Aryans were a superior people and that the strength and purity of his master race had to be preserved. To accomplish this, the Nazis condemned to slavery and to death not only the Jews but other groups that were viewed as inferior or unworthy or as enemies of the state. After taking power in 1933, the Nazis had concentrated on silencing their political opponents, communists, socialists, liberals, anyone who spoke out against the government. Once the Nazis had eliminated these enemies, they turned against other groups. Jews, but also Gypsies, whom the Nazis believed were part of an inferior race, Freemasons, whom the Nazis charged as supporters of a Jewish conspiracy to rule the world, Jehovah's Witnesses, who refused to salute Hitler. The Nazis targeted other Germans who they found unfit to be part of the master race, including people who practiced an alternative lifestyle, anybody mentally deficient, anybody disabled, or incurably ill. The Nazis also targeted the Germans whom they found unfit to be part of the master race for other reasons. Hitler began implementing his final solution in Poland with Hitler's special Nazi death squads. The elite Nazi security squadrons, or SS, rounded up Jews, men, women, children, and babies and shot them on the spot. Jews also were ordered into dismal, overcrowded ghettos, segregated Jewish areas in certain Polish cities. The Nazis sealed them off in the ghettos with barbed wire and stone walls, and life inside the ghettos was miserable. The bodies of victims piled up in the streets faster than they could be removed. Factories were built alongside ghettos where people were forced to work for German industries. In spite of the impossible living conditions, the Jews hung on. While some formed resistance movements inside of the ghettos, others resisted by other means. They published and distributed underground newspapers, secret schools were set up to educate Jewish children, even theater and music groups continued to operate on the down low. While German territory had 250,000 or so Jews, the new territory of Poland that they had just taken over had millions. You'll notice the ghettos are largely located in those areas.